Start at the beginning of sort of the European Western idea of the book, which starts, as everything else, with Greek in Egypt, surprisingly. So we usually say that the history of the book starts with papyri. From the papyrus plant, which grows in the Nile in Egypt exclusively. It's a huge reed which can grow up to 3 meters high, and they use. We have a sample from, thanks to my colleague, where is he? Andrew, to show you what it looks like. I haven't seen the plant myself before this.
Thanks to the Botanic Garden.
Yes, so you can see it live there, right? I suppose. So this is what it is. It's very high, and they use this part of the plant to slice it up to fibers and create sheets like this. This is a modern papyrus created with the same technology as the ancient ones. You can very nicely see the fibers and how the writing surface is created from the fibers pushed together underwater and then dried out. So this is a papyrus which they created in sheets. The sheets were glued together to create long scrolls, which is our object 2. So you can see this now with an original object, what it looks like. A beautifully written papyrus scroll, which is the last bit of a long scroll containing the Iliad of Homer, and we see the close of the work here at the end of the papyrus, Iliados Vita, saying this is the end of book 2 of the Iliad of Homer, written in the 2nd century for a woman in whose grave this was found. Very nicely written, majuscule letters, very beautifully written. There is one problem with it. There is English text on the papyrus, so don't make a mistake. That's not part of the original item. It was written on it in the Bodleian Library. We wouldn't do it nowadays, but they even put the line numbers on it for the readers to help them. But this is the original object, a nice papyrus scroll, which would have been about 3 meters long, containing the entire book 2 of the Iliad, to give you an idea about the early book, which was on papyrus and in a scroll format. Our next stop in this story is this little object, for which I don't have the original, unfortunately, but this is an everyday thing. This is a replica of an ancient wax tablet. Why is this important? This gives us an idea about a completely different layer of literacy. This was very widely used in primary schools in the ancient world for homework for children who used this stylus, which looks exactly like a stylus with an Amazon screen right nowadays, to scratch this wax. And if they didn't like what they wrote, it's easy to erase it. You heat this part of the stylus up on a candle and erase the writing. Once you finish your little homework, you close it, take it to school and present it to the teacher, exactly like a modern homework book. Why is this important? Because we have original tablets even in the collection, which gives us a glimpse into the everyday life of kids about 2,000 years ago. But the reason why it's here as object 3 is this, that these two are bound together. And this is what they originally called a codex. This is the bound book. This is sort of the first instance of a book. It could be multiplied, not just 2, but there could be a 3rd one in the middle, or even more. The British Library has a very nice one from the 2nd century, which has 6 tablets bound together as a little booklet. And that's a proper book, but it couldn't get thicker than that. So 6 or 8 is the maximum, because then it is too clumsy to hold it and handle it. Which is why we get to the second stage in this process, papyrus, so a marriage of this and this. So a bound book, but not with wooden tablets or wax tablets, but using papyrus sheets. And this is one papyrus codex. So the same thing as this one, a book, but using papyrus, which is much handier because you can have much more pages together. You can have an entire booklet. And this is, I'm happy to say, this is the earliest biblical fragment in the Bodleian Library, containing a passage from the Gospel of Matthew, actually, from the 3rd century, which is quite early compared to the history of the Gospel text. So this idea, the marriage of papyrus and booklet, came up with Christianity. There are other pagan instances of a papyrus booklet, but it was probably the Christians who invented the idea of having a book, a bound book, consisting of papyrus leaves. The reason why it happened is disputed. There are people who say that this is turning their backs to the pagan heritage of the pagan literary texts on scrolls, but it's also much handier to navigate in a bound book, which is our object 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is illustrating the advantages of having the text written in a bound book. This is an ordinary little gospel book in Greek. I like this manuscript a lot because it has a very adventurous history, but what I want to show you is this part. Every gospel book usually starts with this, which many of you will recognize. This is the Canon Table, sort of a concordance, a navigation tool for the gospel text, which can only happen in a book format. So what happened is that they distributed the gospel text into chapters, but not verses like we have, but these were sort of content units of the Gospels, which were numbered afterwards in each of the Gospels. And then this was created by a man called Armenian in Egypt in the 3rd century, I believe. And then in the 4th century, Eusebius of Caesarea invented this remarkable tool, how to exploit the numbered chapters in a gospel book in a good way, which is the Canon Tables. So these tables show you the correspondences between the content of each of the gospels. So they usually start with comparing 4 gospels to each other, saying that number 1 in Matthew corresponds to number 5 in Mark, and so on. And this is how a gospel book usually starts, which only makes sense in a bound book format, in a codex. And this is a starting point for a better navigation in the text, and also a starting point for artistic creativity, because people use the Canon Tables to get the fantasy and creativity crazy sometimes. So this is the Greek version of the Canon Tables, so object 5a. 5b shows us how the idea of the Canon Tables actually was adapted to the gospel text in the Armenian tradition. And I quite like this. The same thing from an Armenian gospel book of the 13th century. You can see the idea is still the same, right? Comparing the gospel units to each other according to the same headings as it happened in Greek, but in Ethiopian. So they are very similar, but the culture adopting the idea makes it their own very nicely. So you can see the Armenian art in its highest in this very nice gospel book doing the same. Let me show you another opening. Very beautiful. But it's the same idea, which can only happen in a book. Our object 5ABC is a remarkable manuscript from Western Europe, from Germany, written around 850 AD, so very early. It shows you how the idea developed by Eusebius in Palestine was adopted in the West. So this is a German version of the same thing, the Canon Tables again, comparing the gospel units, but now it is in a Western taste, which is theoretically, in its essence, is the same. But you can see how human creativity changed and adopted this idea in Western Europe. And I couldn't resist showing you an object 5D, which shows you the utmost luxury way of doing this. From a beautiful, it's a facsimile, unfortunately. But it also means that you can touch it, because it's in the open shelf in the reading room. So this is the Pride of Denmark, a very early gospel manuscript written on some of the pages. It's not like the Greeks who could do this with every page, the purple pages, because it was extremely expensive. So you need to be very rich to have a manuscript written on purple pages only. So this one only has a couple. But it shows you what can happen with the Canon Tables if you get your fantasy absolutely out and want to make a really fancy one with gold and all the colors. But this all shows what the bound book actually allowed users to do for navigation, but also how it inspired and implemented artistic creativity across a lot of cultures and time. Our object 6 in the history of the book is an adaptation of the same idea, but as I forgot to mention the change of material here. This is all on papyrus, as I said, and this is parchment, animal skin, as we know. The next stage is replacing this, which is quite complicated and expensive, with the Oriental invention of the paper. So this is a paper manuscript from the 15th century, a very nice humanistic copy of the historical work of Valerius Maximus from Florence. For the market, you can see how the bottom of the page was filled with the coats of arms of the one who commissioned it. But it also shows us the revival of the Carolingian manuscripts, which occur in this manuscript towards the end. How humanists thought that the earliest and most untouched version of the Latin script was the Carolingian manuscript, which is probably not true, but that's what they believed. So they wanted to create a sense of originality in the 15th century with this manuscript. And our object 7, which is marking the end of this presentation, is the printed version of the same text, Valerius Maximus in print. And I quite like the idea how similar they are. The fonts and leaving a space for the nice initial, which was hand-painted in the printed books, the early printed books. So this is the Editio Princeps, the first edition of the same text, marking the big jump from handwritten objects to something printed, which is the starting point of the printed books. And that's another history to tell. Thank you very much.